Hola y bienvenidos a mi presentación sobre el recurso literario de oximorones y cómo se usa en literatura. Oh, whoops. It has just occurred to me that this is for an English class. I'm sorry. Hello and welcome to my presentation about oxymorons and how they are used in literature. And yeah, let's begin. An oxymoron is a single phrase with two contradictory terms that is used for literary effect as a form of extreme juxtaposition very briefly. And the reason that it's so often used is because it makes the reader pay attention more as they realize that what they're reading doesn't initially make sense and they have to think about it more to realize what it's actually saying because the two terms do directly conflict with each other. Now, let's take a look at some examples of this. In William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare is having Romeo use several oxymorons in his soliloquy so that he can express how self-contradictory his emotions are after he was rejected by Rosaline and how confused and miserable it is causing him to be. This quote from Animal Farm by George Orwell mocks how immediately following a violent revolution, the oppressed party which takes over often becomes just as oppressive as the party that was previously there. Obviously, more equal than others is an oxymoron because the idea of being more equal does not truly exist, but this is being used to suggest that there is clearly a power that is in dominance. The song The Sounds of Silence by Paul Simon, a song in which even the title is oxymoronic, contains the words talk without speaking and hear without listening. Obviously, in the literal sense, neither one of these are possible, but it is being used to mention people's propensity to say things that mean absolutely nothing, and the propensity of others to not pay any attention to it, even on the rare occasion when what they are saying has meaning. In an excerpt from Alexander Pope's Essays of Criticism, he uses the phrase bookful blockhead when describing certain members of the educated class. And in saying bookful blockhead, he is referring to someone who is well educated yet has very little common sense, as obviously someone who is bookful is typically thought of as a particularly intelligent person. He is saying that there are well-educated people who still possess very little common sense. William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar contains a line with the words fearful bravery. Now, obviously, bravery is typically supposed to mean the opposite of fear, but in saying fearful bravery, Shakespeare is referring to someone bearing some kind of burden or facing some kind of challenge with remarkable fortitude despite being scared. In the part of Jane Eyre where Jane Eyre is approaching Thornfield for the first time, she describes herself as looking towards Thornfield with timorous joy. Now, timorous means with great fear, and it is impossible for fear and joy to truly coexist in this sense. So it is speaking of how Jane is truly thrilled to finally be independent of Gateshead and Lowood, yet at the prospect of her independence, she is still terrified as it is still very unfamiliar to her. A common misuse of oxymoron is for those to assume that it does not apply to a single phrase. And so, for example, the line, "You can save money by spending it." Now, that does contain two self-contradictory terms, but those are two self-contradictory phrases as opposed to two self-contradictory words, and in this case, that would actually be a paradox and not an oxymoron.